Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Female Entrepreneurs Worldwide panel discussion, How to Stand Out and Elevate Your Brand. The session will be conducted in English. 各位来宾，欢迎来临 Female Entrepreneurs Worldwide 论坛，如何让品牌脱颖而出？今天的研讨会将以英语进行。Before we invite the speakers on stage, Ms. Edith Chan, Head of Public Relations from Female Entrepreneurs Worldwide, will share some updates about the organization with you all. Edith, please.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join the panel discussion today with all of us. And I'm sure all of you have already get an idea in terms of what Female Entrepreneur Worldwide is. So we are an international platform to connect, inspire, and also empower women to pursue their own entrepreneurial spirits and also ambitions. So I'm very happy to bring you some updates about our organizations. So we are very excited to launch our 1 Million Women's Dream campaign. So we will be launching a competition on Instagram. So you only need to take a selfie of yourself and then tell us your dream in the caption. And then the last thing is to tag FEW, Dare to Dream. And the winner will be able to win a round trip ticket to our Shanghai event as well as the conference mission. So this is a very exciting event. I hope all of you can join us with that. And also another update, very exciting upcoming. So it's basically a lot of people have been asking us, oh, do you have a membership program that I'm able to join and to stay connected with the organization? Previously, we have been saying, oh, no, we didn't have it yet. But today, things is going to change. We are going to launch our premium membership programs. And our colleagues will be able to share with you more information later. And they'll be distributing the flyers to share with all of you. And I hope you enjoy the panel discussion that will be starting very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edith. And today, we have very honored to have Mr. Adrian Warr, Managing Director, Edelman, Hong Kong, Ms. Pamela Ambler, Digital Reporter, Forbes, and Mr. Bohan, co-founder of Totem Collective, to share how to stand out and elevate your brand. We are also delighted to have Ms. Tiffany Ap from Women's Wear Daily to be our moderator. Without further ado, may I invite Mr. Adrian Warr, Ms. Pamela Ambler, Mr. Bohan, and Ms. Tiffany Ap to come on stage and start their presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please.
Okay. So I want to open today's conversation with a quote that I'm sure many of you have heard, and it goes like this. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? So in this digital age, when everybody with an iPhone, anyone with an internet connection can become a brand or a KOL, how do you stand out? And hopefully today we're going to answer that question, and we have 3 branding and media experts today. So let's meet them. Adrian, let's start with you.
Hi, it's quite loud, isn't it? I'm Adrian Warr, and I'm the Managing Director of Edelman Hong Kong, which is a large communications, marketing, branding, PR firm. And I am, as you can probably tell, not female, not an entrepreneur, and as you can probably also tell, I'm not a fashion expert, but I have had the privilege to work with a lot of major brands and very small brands, whether they're startup or international, in fashion, retail, also in corporate and elsewhere. So hopefully I'll be able to share some views on that today.
Hi, I'm Pamela Ambler. I'm a digital reporter with Forbes here in Asia. I cover most all of Asia in terms of content. We write a lot about entrepreneurs. You might have seen us for the list that we put out on 30 Under 30, the Rich List. One focus that our magazine and our digital site does is we like telling stories about people. A lot of times, you know, we hear about companies, but it's not companies that are doing things, it's the people behind the companies that are actually making things happen. So we like to feature people and bring more of a human aspect to our stories.
Hi, my name is Bohan. I'm currently the Senior PR Executive at Mr. Porter, which is a menswear luxury e-commerce. And also I co-founded my brand called Totem Collective around last year. And we launched this year in Paris. And also I do some freelance consultancy for some small brands as well to launch in Europe or in Asia. I'm also not a female.
Okay, so first things first, what makes a good brand? So tell me guys, what would make something stand out to you? What catches your eye?
So, so many different things. I think it's a combination of what we would call in branding lots of different touch points. So it's probably difficult to encapsulate what's going to make a successful brand. And indeed, one of the things that many successful brands have is individuality. So trying to apply one rule to all of them is a little bit difficult. But I think one thing that we know from a lot of the research that we do for consumer-facing brands these days is that brands that serve a purpose, or that are seen to serve a purpose, are infinitely preferable and more desirable to people than those that are just seen to be making money and making products. So I think if you look at many of the successful brands out there in most industries, you'll find that they're really successful ones are finding a way of, if not contributing to a cause, then at least making an impact outside of just making beautiful things and making money.
Yeah, I think today it's very important to, when you see a brand and it really talks to a specific audience, and when you can really identify that really clearly, I think that to me is a brand that would stand out to me. And that's also a good brand. When you capture what the people want, when you really capture the people that you want to be captured. So sometimes, like you might see a lot of new brands coming out, and a lot of them, they're trying to do everything, and they try to appeal to everybody. And I think a lot of the times when I see brands like that, I can't really find where it's, what is special about this brand, and that's when I feel like the brand is not strong to me.
I fully agree with that. You can't be everything to everyone, and that's when your brand gets diluted. When I think of brands, I think of it in terms of advertising, when you're pushing out the message for your brand, because in that context, there's what's called the industry, or the advertising industry calls push marketing versus pull marketing. And when you think of push marketing, it generally involves something that's quite intrusive. It's not a message that you necessarily feel is relevant to you, and you feel like, especially at this time and age where time is the most precious commodity, it's wasting your time. And so the same goes with brands. Your brand message and who you're targeting needs to be the right audience. Going back to what you were saying, you can't be everything to everyone, and a good brand has very strong messaging, knows exactly who their target market is, and has a purpose.
I think that's an amazing point, actually. The pull marketing thing, one of the best campaigns that I've seen recently in the retail industry was REI, the US outdoors clothes manufacturer, and they did a campaign for Black Friday last year. While everyone else was out driving sales and doing a massive discount, REI shut all of their shops for Black Friday, closed down the whole network. The idea and thinking behind that being, often brands think that their job is to go out there and sell products and say, hey, I'm going to sell stuff to you. But if I'm going to buy things at REI, I'm not really buying things because I want things from REI. I'm buying them because I want to go spend the weekend outdoors with my family or go on a walk. So they were talking about something and they were presenting themselves as relevant to me rather than just relevant to pushing their own product. And it's a classic case of pull rather than push marketing.
So we live in a hyper-connected world at the moment. How would you say that digitalization has changed the entire industry and the way we communicate?
Where to start on that one? How long have we got? Well, you guys will know about this more than anyone else. I think one of the biggest impacts has been that the traditional media has maintained its importance, but lost the ability to monetize that importance in many ways, largely because it has lost the power of distribution. So digitization of channels has made it much, much harder for great publications like Forbes or Menswear to sell products direct to me. They now have to cater to that being shared and found on search, and that's made it a little bit harder to make money, and it's made it more confusing about how you can get your information out there and what information is found. So I think it's made the world a much more complex place. I think the media will, long story short, remonetize itself. I think it becomes even more indispensable in a world where you've got too much information. And I think the other plus side of this is that it has become much more measurable to see where conversations are going, who's talking to who, where influence lies. So there are positives and negatives, but yeah, it's been tough on traditional media.
I think going back to what you were saying, how digitalization has changed the game, and I think it has totally changed the game. Like before, it was kind of like the traditional fashion cycle. You do your show, you do your presentation, you wait for the buyers to come, see your looks, wait for the press to report it. But now it's kind of like, I encountered this a lot during Fashion Week. It's like they would tell you that, okay, nowadays, do you want buyers to pay attention to you? Do you want press to cover your story? How many Instagram followers do you have? Like, are you famous in your own community yet? So that said, how to capture and have already built up this community before the rest of the fashion industry catches you, you need to, going back to the first question, have already identified very clearly your kind of cult. You have to have a cult culture to have people really following you very tightly, very loyally, and then eventually, the buyers, the stores, the press, they'll pick up because they'll see, okay, there's relevance in this brand, and there's a bunch of people who are really die-hard fans for this brand, so we should pay attention to this brand as well.
Does this in effect mean that there's actually more work for brand owners to do? So say 2 decades ago, you just had to make sure you got into Vogue and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and now you have to make sure the 5 KOLs push you and the celebrity wears you down the red carpet and all the other magazines, traditional and online.
I think that also depends on how you define your brand. Obviously, there are a lot of brands who are really targeting, have this KOL to wear the shoes, and then your shoes is going to sell like crazy. But if it's not something you want to do, if your brand don't want to have KOLs, then obviously it needs to be more creative and inventive in terms of how to push your brand, your own ideas out there. I was thinking about this question a lot as well. Like, do we absolutely have to have KOLs to wear your products to be able to sell? And I think there are other ways that you can create a much more interesting story, that you can use these stories, whether it's a collaboration, whether it's you do something completely random that is just like out of this world that no other classic brands have ever done. These kind of things, when it really breaks out, then it does.
So I want to ask, at what point in a brand's lifespan do you know whether you should be just trying to do it yourself, realizing that I think a lot of you in the audience are small business owners, so maybe you hire one marketing person or PR person versus going to a PR firm, making that investment, working with the likes of Edelman. What would be your advice?
Everyone should work with Edelman. No, look, I think there's no hard and fast rule on that one, is there? I think you don't necessarily need a communications agency. Certainly in this day and age, you don't necessarily need a communications agency for what you used to have them for, which is calling up journalists. That, I think, has, thank goodness, changed quite a lot. I think there's a great deal of stuff that should be done by the entrepreneur and the business owner because they are often the story in themselves, and they often are, in this industry, what makes the brand. They're the power behind the creative. They are kind of the essence of why the brand exists, and so they need to be front and center. So if they surround themselves with marketing people, they're going to lose that quite a lot. But I do think you need experts to help. I think it is an immensely complex world when you get into digital. You definitely need help. There's quite a lot that's automated. So, we were talking about KOLs and influencers. You can buy programs and databases which will tell you which are going to be the most useful, and then you can engage with them direct. You don't need to hire an expert for a lot of things that you might feel like you need.
The pitches that I get it sometimes directly from the founders of companies, from investors. It could be a lot from communications firms. When you're small and starting off, you definitely don't have that budget. And most of journalists' emails or contact information are available online. Twitter, I do actually agree that Twitter is a very good way, and I found is a very good way of reaching people. At times I would email people and I would get a faster response on Twitter before I would get a response in email, because it seems like a more urgent, serious and real-time, relevant question, because email sometimes at this point in time will sometimes take people a couple of days to get back to you. So even if you can't find the phone number, you can definitely tweet or email. That information is all out there. That being said, I generally, if I don't follow up on the first email, if somebody writes to me again or follows up, I definitely respond, and I'm sure that's how most people, you follow up 2 or 3 times, they will at least give you the time to say, sorry, I have to pass at this opportunity, or thank you for your pitch, but you're making that relationship. You're picking up the phone also always helps. I appreciate the courage people have when they're just cold pitching you out of nowhere, because they really have something that they want to share with you. They feel like they have something that they believe in very strongly, and that often comes through in a phone conversation that's more personable.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked on a basis with and without a PR agency, so I really realized the difference. I think without, because normally I'm a supporter, we don't really work with a PR agency, so it's kind of like me, myself, emailing like 350 journalists in all of Asia. And I think obviously there's a challenge, because what I find effective as well, like what Pamela just said, is after the email, you send them a text message, you give them a ring, and you kind of remind them, because they get so many emails every day. Having a press office is kind of like the lazy way out, because they do all the work for you. But I think when it comes to like perhaps hosting an event in a place that you don't really have experience in or contacts in, or which is something actually I'm planning to do now, and then the PR agency is a lot more helpful in terms of getting a different audience for you. Really, targeting what are the essential people you need to come to your event, to pitch to speak to. What are the media that are most essential in the region. So I think in that sense, you could consider a PR agency when you're conquering a new market that you're not really familiar with.
I want to go back to the idea of personalization, having a face connected to your brand. So, Bohan, you work for a really well-known global brand, but you have your own brand, and you're a little bit of a KOL. Would you agree?
No.
I was checking on Instagram. You have like 15,000 followers or so. So, how do you think that is kind of the new model of doing things, where no one is really just a traditional journalist or traditional, brand founder? They have to kind of be a Renaissance kind of jack of all trades.
I mean, I hate to say, but I do agree. It does seem like a lot of people with some kind of, because it's kind of the connections that you can make and the influence that you can have, it's kind of like this small credibility that you have when you're speaking to different people. It is a cruel world out there. People are looking at your Instagram followers, and when you do, it does help a little bit in terms of, when you go to events, when you go to different places, you can meet a lot more people from different angles. But I totally don't think this is absolutely essential. There are still a lot of brands or designers who don't really care about social media, and they really restrain in their own very independent individual voice. And then they, going back to the first question again, can really lock down the cult that, the people that feel like they're following this person in whatever culture or universe they're trying to create. And in that sense, you don't need to be a super big influencer yourself to be able to have a very successful brand.
So I don't disagree, but I would sort of have a slightly different way of looking at it. I think with a lot of the new, with media having disintegrated, become much more complicated than it is, there's a tendency to try and think that everything is completely new. Actually, KOLs are just another form of celebrity endorsement reborn, right? It's not new, it's the same. What you've got is a greater deal of choice for them, which is fantastic for startup brands, because you're never going to have as a startup brand the access to get endorsement from George Clooney. But if you can get a bunch of people that are super cool at a grassroots level to go and endorse your brand, yes, it'll work. But nobody in their right mind would make that the only pillar of their brand strategy. You can't. For a start, celebrity is a very febrile and facile kind of industry, and just because they're cool today, they may not be cool tomorrow, and you don't want to base your brand on someone else's identity. It's your brand. So they might be part of it, but they can't be the be-all and end-all. Traditional media, undoubtedly, is still vitally important, and as I say, those media that have struggled will reinvent, the media that have survived will remain even stronger. In a world in which you've got access to information absolutely everywhere, and discussions going on about fake news, you're increasingly getting this sense that we don't know who to trust. And the fact that you're reading something or watching something by someone that's trained for a long time, that has to fact check, that has to sell it to an editor, and that can get sued if they give the wrong information, that has value, and it will continue to have value. Also, I think in a lot of industries, fashion being one of them, it is still driven as a creative industry by a small number of very influential people. And yeah, if you do want to go very, very big at some point, you are going to have to be in vogue. You're not going to do it by going just through influencers. So I think it's a balance. I think it would be risky to say that traditional media is not still by far and away one of the biggest, most important parts of raising your brand.
I mean, in terms of our brand, the Forbes brand here in Asia, it's relatively new. We also experimented with an Instagram takeover from one of our 30 under 30 recipients this year. It's done us tremendously well in terms of our social media, but that same strategy doesn't work across all the different mediums and platforms. So one, we realized that we got a lot of female followers on social media or on Instagram through the takeover, and then we saw that our demographic on Facebook skews more men. So you definitely have to come up with a different strategy for the different channels, and also, of course, the I guess point to sale or online to offline sort of reach. It has to be different.
And I think since there's so many of these kind of collaborations or Instagram takeovers out there, I've kind of experienced and tried out a few methods where eventually the conversion rate didn't work out so well. And so I think first you really need to choose the right, if you want to work with a KOL, you have to choose the right one that really represents your brand. It can't just be someone it's like, okay, he's really famous, let's use him. You have to have someone that believes in your philosophy as well. And most of the case, they'll do it for free if they really think that what you're doing is incredible as well. And secondly, you have to always innovate, and even like the copy they write for the caption, or even the pictures and what kind of messages you want them to convey. These are very important in terms of how eventually it would convert back to your brand.
Pamela, I want to ask you, if someone wants to reach out to you, or any journalist, what is your advice to them? And I suppose Adrian as well, like, have you ever taken on a client and seen what their press strategy was and been like, oh my gosh, like, oh, let me fix that for you?
I would say first and foremost, send an email, because for the most part, I will try to at least read through, skim through. Sometimes it's in the back of my mind and it gets pushed back, and that's where the phone call or the follow-up text message, WhatsApp, works really, really well. But I really have to stress, half the time I get these phone calls, generally when I answer the phone and I see a number that I don't recognize, I would say, hello, Pamela speaking, and the person would immediately say to me, may I speak to Pamela Ambler, please? And that is a first impression, unfortunately very lasting for me, because I feel like you're not listening from the very beginning, so how are you a good communicator if you're not a good listener? And so I try not to discount that conversation after that, but more than half the phone calls I get end up being that. But the reason, I understand the reason why it happens. It's because a lot of times PR professionals are maybe trained to follow a script. They're very much retelling the story of what is already in the press release. And I get a lot of times people will read it to me verbatim again. Actually, before I get to that, the amount of times that they don't introduce themselves clearly and say what they're calling about, they just jump right into the topic. I have no context. I need a little bit more context. But if you go through those, at least those 2 or 3 steps, I will listen to what you have to say. Like I said, once you get to the point of pitching, if you can instead of pitching a topic, pitch me a story. So, for example, today, this is actually an intern in our office who said, I want to write a story about sleeping pods. So sleeping pods is the topic. What is the story behind sleeping pods? Is it gaining, I don't want just like trend stories like, oh, now it's gaining more popularity, or now it's, they're closing down, but is it because, for example, so I suggested to her, is it because mainland China is not allowing tour groups to go to South Korea? So there's more tourists coming to Hong Kong, and there's more demand for hotel rooms than there is vacancy. And so now we're seeing more of these pod hotels. You have to explore these ideas, and a lot of times they can be theories, but it tells me that you're thinking. And when you pitch me something, pitch me beyond just a topic.
Yeah, sorry. No, I really agree, but at the same time, I also feel like pitching to journalists from different media, from different countries, who all have really different working methods, you really have to identify that as well. For example, when pitching to like more Anglo-Saxon or European American journalists, they are more. I know, for me, I feel like they're more tentative to listen to what you have to say. But I feel like for a lot of Asian journalists, or for example in China or in Hong Kong or Taiwan, some of them, you really have to make their jobs really easy. You basically have to tell them the story they can directly write about. So you can't just give them a topic that they have to rethink and put it into another context. You have to basically write an article for him that he can just do some edits and then republish. And I find that very powerful when it comes to especially Chinese press. So
yeah, I think that's a shame. That's sad. Unfortunately, you do hear a lot more of that. And unfortunately, it's because for a lot of trade publications, smaller publications, revenue's down, and so the journalists are less experienced, or they're just pushed to write too many stories a day. But I think I would look at it differently. It goes back to your comments before on push-pull marketing. I think if you go to a journalist and make their life easier and have a symbiotic relationship and give them a story that they can write, then it's going to work. If you go and yell at them, hey, I've got a product, let's work out how we write about it, that's push marketing. You're not giving them what they need. I think the right relationship between communications people, or just brands, frankly, and media, is to try and understand that the journalist is writing for an audience, and they're not there to write about your product, they're there to write about a story, so give them good content. After that, relationship can help, but frankly, if we were best mates and had been to university together, you're not going to broadcast a dud story if it's a dud story. Ultimately, the quality of the content is what's going to matter more than anything else.
I get that a lot of times when you're pitching for your own brand, you're very much in the mindset of thinking about what's in front of you. And what I encourage you to do is try to think of it in a bigger context, in the context of an industry as a whole, or the direction of where things are going looking forward. So looking at industry trends. I love figures. I love examples to back up what you're trying to tell me. I like a lot of times more than one example of showing the same trend. I can't say it enough, but the numbers help tremendously. When I see statistics, that's where I find stories.
So I know we're here to discuss how to stand out, but actually, given that a lot of companies are not, they're not the Net-a-Porters of the world, do you have a better chance of getting publicity if you actually say, I'm a company like this, and it's a trend because of XYZ, and so yes, your peers, your rivals would also get a mention, but then so would you. Is that a good strategy, do you think?
I think that for smaller brands to be able to fight asymmetrical warfare, yeah, absolutely. If you look at, so a couple of years ago you had the Ice Bucket Challenge, made more impact on social media than anything has in a matter of weeks. Zero ad spend, zero publicity, totally naturally happened because people want to do it. It earned attention. If you can capture ideas that earn people's attention, you will naturally be able to spread now. The power of your own family and friends, let alone influencers, and the trust that they have online is greater than most of the advertising that you're going to be able to afford. I think, traditional media is still important, but that's harder to get into. As a small brand, that's harder to be the story if you're a small brand. As long as you can create something interesting, that works. But from a digital environment, way more opportunity for smaller companies.
Pamela, what you said about calling, I've always thought of calling as a bit like going to second base. So you gotta court the journalist a little bit and email, and then if they show interest, that's when you can call, that's when you can text. Is that unique to Western kind of journalists, how they operate? Is it different maybe in Hong Kong or in the mainland? Mainland's WeChat, right? It's audio messages.
Yeah, so basically what I do, I always send the email kind of like a formality or something they can copy and paste. And then I obviously follow up with a WeChat message or just, and you can't be really too serious, especially like a lot of the people, like a lot of the journalists in mainland China are not that serious anyways. You're kind of like friends with them. So it's like, if I tell you about this, you know, in a really formal way, I feel really awkward. So in Mr. Porter, we have this thing called the pub test. It's like, if you can't tell it to a buddy in a pub with a beer, what you're trying to say, you can't send that as an email. Because if it sounds too kind of awkward, like, you know, trying too hard, then it sounds really weird. You have to make it like kind of relaxed, casual, be like, hey, you know, I have this new thing coming up, and I think it's really cool, you know, it would be great if you guys could support, and stuff like that. That's how it works, but I've seen my UK and US colleagues work in a totally different way.
Yeah, I can't speak about mainland or local Hong Kong media, to be honest, but my working personality of being, I guess, a Western-trained journalist and working in the types of newsrooms that I have been in, you have to have a very aggressive personality. You have to have thick skin. And so I appreciate it when I hear that or I see that exhibited through other people showing me their passion, because it's not just the PR or the communications person saying, hey, we have this event. Are you going to attend? Yes or no? Like, I don't respond to that at all.
No, I understand. Like with, you know, obviously European journalists and stuff, every time I write an email, it's kind of like a job application. It's like I feel like I have to be, you know, okay, this is what it means, you know, this is what is important, and this is, you have to like have all the information on it, like very tidied up, very clear to see and everything, and then, you know, then you obviously pursue the traditional kind of like calling or texting in different ways.
Because if you think of it, you pitch something to me, the next step I have to do is I have to convince my editor that it's good enough to go to print, or good enough to write a story worthy of other people's attentions, our readers, our audience. Do other people care enough about this topic? So you're pitching to me, but then I'm batting for you in the next step.
So the rejection is a reality of trying to get more publicity, more people talking about your brand. What is your advice there? For instance, how do you know when to follow up? What's appropriate?
Look, I think you have to kiss a lot of frogs and wait till one turns into a princess until you start recognizing which frogs, and you gradually narrow it down. I'd love to say there was a simple formula, but I think it's learning by experience a lot of the time. I think you can get a lot of good advice from people along the way, but there is a lot of rejection, and you've just got to keep learning from each one and taking it on to the next one, I think.
But you guys are professionals, and what do you think your success rate would be for pitching people versus people picking it up?
So it's much easier as an agency, because we're able to tell brands when they come to us, look, that's not going to work. And if that's the story that you want to go for, sorry, we can't help you. So we would have an unnaturally high success rate, whereas if you're a brand, you're not going to have that luxury. I would say, you know, if you are, in this day and age as well, I think it's really difficult with media, especially lifestyle media, because there is, unless you're looking at listings and product news, it's much harder to get a story into multiple publications. And it's a pretty bad idea probably to try and press release everything out to everyone. I think it's sort of better to try and focus on quality pieces with a journalist that actually gets to know the story and then move on to a different journalist for another story. If you do that, you'll narrow down the rejection rate a bit, but I think just conveyor belt phoning up journalists with the same story doesn't work very effectively.
That brings up a really good point. So I guess, Pamela, if someone talked to you and then also talked to Fortune and talked to Wall Street Journal, would you get offended?
No, I wouldn't get offended. But before we get to that, just to your point about whether or not you can get your message out there, one way in which a lot of online publications are going, and Forbes does this as well, is you might have seen a contributors network. The contributors network is something that if you feel that you have what we call a very strong swim lane, in the industry we call a beat. So if your beat is fashion, or if your beat is luxury, or we have even people whose beat is just to write about watches. If you feel like you are very knowledgeable in that field, and I'm sure you guys all know much more about lifestyle and fashion than I do, then you are considered the expert in that field. And we welcome people who want to write about that topic consistently. We look for long-term relationships. And that's something, if you're interested, email me or come up to me after the panel and speak to me about, I can share with you more information. And that is one way of how a lot of what I noticed is smaller companies and brands start off by having that consistent voice and being able to reach different audience through media on their own.
And other publications would have an op-ed page, right? So they can put your opinions out there on, I guess, the latest industry trend. But no, going back to...
Sorry, what was the question?
I mean, pitching, if you're talking to multiple outlets,
Right.
How do you make sure you're not, because people do get territorial. You don't want to step into kind of...
I mean, sometimes people will tell me this is an exclusive upfront, but I expect most people to be speaking to multiple news. I don't get offended. I guess I'm not at that stage yet where I expect to get all these scoops, but I'm totally fine with it. I think that's healthy competition.
But I think when it comes to a lot of fashion publications, they can be a little bit more sensitive to that. For example, so that's the way I work is when you have a story where you have a new launch that you want to pitch to the media, you first identify, like in each country, which magazine or which website you want to have the exclusive or to break the news. And you speak to this one person first. If he doesn't respond, set your own internal deadlines. If he doesn't respond, talk to the next best, like your next best option, and then talk to the next best option. If out of 3 didn't work, none of them replied, then you speak to everybody at the same time. And I have also run into situations where you've already committed an exclusive to the second best option, but then the best option replied you. They're like, oh, actually, I want to run this exclusively. So those situations are a lot trickier to handle, and you have to kind of figure out like, okay, so we give the online exclusive to this one, and then we give the kind of print exclusive to the other one, and work out different ways or different stories. Or even with the same story, you pitch it differently. For example, if it's a shoot done in Asia, then you pitch more focus towards the Asian media, or if it's like done in Copenhagen, then you do the Nordic media. And kind of but for each, obviously for their relevance is very different. For the Asian one, it's kind of like, oh, a cool brand in Europe doing cool things. But for Scandinavia, it's probably actually like a new travel spot you can discover with, the product you're trying to sell.
That works for me as well if I turn down a pitch the first time and you repitch it with a different angle. I've certainly seen that catch my attention because, once again, it's showing you're persistent and showing you're very passionate about something.
Question, how do you divvy up paid media, earned media, so just talking to journalists, trying that route, chasing, hacks around, versus, are you trying to land a profile in a newspaper, or are you trying to take an ad out in a newspaper and work with the KOL, or is it all three, really?
It depends on the size of the company, strategy, what you're trying to do, but certainly the print advert is going to be less effective these days. And what I would tend to, just compared to 10 years ago, not less effective than other things. So it isn't declining. It still can be very effective. But I think if you're going to use your money wisely, my argument would be to focus on an earned approach rather than a paid approach. But that doesn't mean not paying. So what I would do is I would get myself an interview on Forbes, have a chat, hopefully do a video or something like that would go online, but then I would ask Forbes if they're going to have permission to then amplify that through my Facebook page, my LinkedIn page, my Instagram, and I'd put my paid budget behind that. And that way it spreads naturally through my network and it's earning attention rather than trying to rub it in people's faces. And that's quite a measurable way of doing it, and it's a bit more cost effective if you're a smaller brand.
So we're running out of time, and I want to let the audience ask questions. So just one statement. There is no such thing as bad PR, true or false? Bohan, let's go with you.
There is.
Example? Name names.
I think when you have a story that comes out and it has Okay, so for example, I've seen some stories that's kind of like a collaboration between an artist or a brand, but then eventually it comes out and then the entire attention, no, I take that back, sorry.
So yes, there's all PR is good PR.
No, let me think about an example.
We'll come back, Pamela.
I don't really. Well, let me give you this. I wrote a story about a startup being invested by a bigger internet company. I'm very much featured the founder in a very positive light. I got a call from the PR person saying, "Oh, I really appreciate the article. Thank you for including the video. But can you change the title?" And I said, "What's wrong with the title? Like, what don't you like about it?" And she said, "It doesn't mention our name, the name of our company." And I was just thinking, well, you don't really need your name to be mentioned. Sometimes for readers also, they know how to read between the lines, let alone this person's name is repeated over and over again in the article. The company is mentioned multiple times. We talk about the growth and the success. But I think a lot of times people want or ask or think in their mind, there's only, if I get all my talking points across, then that is good PR. I don't think that's true, because the amount of times that I was watching the news and I Googled the name of a company or Googled the name of the person who is speaking to find out and learn more about, I believe other people do that as well.
So, see, I think the phrase, comes from people who believe that even getting lots of attention for bad things is still attention, so there it goes. I don't really buy into it. I think there are people who have made livings off just being shocking and rude and doing the wrong thing, and that's great. They make a certain amount of money out of it, and there are brands that do it too, but they tend not to last very long. I think being contentious for the sake of being contentious is stupid unless that's really the base of your brand. So I think it really can damage you. At the same time, there's plenty of examples you can pull out of companies that have had horrifically bad PR that are still doing fine. Volkswagen, largest emission scandal in the world, sales are up. Cathay, 600 job losses, profits down, sales are up. You can go through fairly large crises and still come out of it fairly well. I just don't think it's a good way to build a brand. And is there bad PR in the other sense? Oh my God, yes, so much bad PR, so much. But the most regular result of bad PR is that you don't see it. Biggest result is journalists hanging up on you and telling you they don't want to hear your story because it was a rubbish sell. So I think there's lots of it.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have a mic going around. Yeah, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and it'll come to you. Don't be shy. Okay, well, while you guys are thinking of your next question, let's talk a little bit more about bad PR. So let's say inadvertently you got picked up by the press, but for all the wrong reasons. What do you do then?
So it's always going to happen, and I think it is a case of explaining, contrition, and then showing what the next step forward is. I don't think it's about making excuses. I think it's about saying this is what happened and why. Demonstrating contrition, which does mean saying sorry, and no, that doesn't prove liability, so you can say sorry. And then explaining how you're going to move forward from this. And I think actually there are lots of companies, brands as well, that have come out stronger from handling crises because they've done that well. People know that companies, like humans, are not perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. How you deal with it is very, very important. If you, not mentioning any names, but if you deplane someone violently and then don't apologize quickly, yeah, the world's going to hate you for a bit. So I think the way you handle it is almost more important than the crisis itself. Obviously, when we get into territories of people having died or been injured, I think that's different. But generally speaking, okay to have a crisis if you handle it well.
But isn't there a school of thought or some instances where ignoring it would be better, or like if by responding you're giving the news cycle another 24 hours of life?
Almost never. In fact, I can't think of one. I can't think of an example where ignoring it would. Because, yeah, if it's out there, and you ignoring it becomes more of the story. And in traditional media, you can refuse to give an interview. Traditional media is like someone picking on a phone and trying to get you on the phone. You just don't pick up the phone. In a world of social media, the conversation is going on whether you like it or not. And you're in the room with everyone whether you like it or not. So you're just standing there refusing to contribute when people are shouting at you. So you kind of have to get involved.
Because whenever that name of the company is Googled, again, the last record is that you have imprinted is something negative.
I agree, and now I come to kind of an example of a pretty major PR crisis I had to deal with earlier this year. So we did, our brand did a collaboration with deceased artist Ren Hang, and I sent out all the stuff before Fashion Week. But then all of a sudden, when I was sending it, when I was printing the additional assets, he unfortunately passed away. But then this piece of news all of a sudden got picked up by so many crazy media that I never even thought I would be reaching out to. But then there was a lot of rumors and wrong information out there. And so actually at the end, even though there was so much coverage from all different kind of media, from Vogue, from BOF and everything, but you need to fix a lot of their information because at the time it was super sensitive, and you don't want your brand to be associated with misinformation or information that is not true or that would hurt people's feelings and that would convey the wrong message. So that was kind of quite a big task that you have to deal with, to speak to everybody, apologize for not making it clear, and then eventually asking them to amend accordingly out of respect, out of the fact-checking. Yeah.
Any questions? There we go.
Hi, it's Rebecca from Artemis. I was wondering about digital and articles, whether you need a video. So would you recommend that every article has a video these days? And should the brand make their own video, or does a publication like Forbes actually help make the video?
We are working on video. That is one of our top priorities. At the moment, we use software and still images, but we are moving forward and shooting and editing our own content. That is to become a priority, but not every story needs video, only when there is a strong visual. In the world of fashion or lifestyle, oftentimes it's very appealing, and we see that as well, and that's what gets those clicks that we want. So yes, a video is necessary. What we did find, though, is it's kind of interesting, is a lot of times video accompanied with an article, the social media share through rate is, you get a lot more shares on social media, but the click-through rate into the article is a lot lower, so they don't necessarily convert, because when people see the video, they feel like, oh, I've already got all the information I need, I don't need to read the article. So there are, I guess, pros and cons for a brand when they're looking to convey the message, and we are always open to discussion on whether or not to include visual elements.
So video, just about that, we did some research and we found that videos are 18 times more likely to be shared, generally speaking. But the number of people who are following the whole of that video through and really watching it is much, much lower, so you get much lower engagement. You also get much bigger tech problems of it just not reaching people, the video not working, people being out of Wi-Fi so they can't get it properly. So don't rely solely on it. But in terms of content creation, the rate of video versus everything else is massive. Everyone's creating video now.
Yeah, but so even if you don't make a video, I find a little gimmicky thing that works really well is GIFs. GIFs work really well. They don't take so much of your data, and then it's really easy to be shared, and people can save it, and it's kind of funky, kind of different, and it's more vibrant than the image, of course. Yeah.
I think we had another question in the second row over here.
Hi, my name is Komal, and my question is for Adrian. It's about the influencer marketing, that's happening all around, where every other person on Instagram writes influencer in their bio. So how do you, as somebody in the PR agency, differentiate between an actual influencer or an influencer, like a fake influencer, where you have the number, like they might have 20,000 followers, but that's not really translating into anything for your product or for your brand. So how does a PR person pick out between a fake influencer and an actual influencer? Thank you.
It's a great question. It depends what your business goal is. So I have a staggering 208 followers on Instagram, but a lot of them are PR people. So if you wanted to influence some PR people, I might be quite good. So I think what you're trying to look at is who you try and influence. With the piece of information that you're trying to put out there, imagine the audience you're trying to reach and what you want them to think, feel, and do differently. If you are putting something out there to a millennial audience because you want them to buy your items, then what you're looking at probably is a combination of reach and influence. So you're going to look for people that have a very large number of followers. What you're then going to actually look through is what other endorsements they have, who else they're working with, how much they're going to promote you, and actually how much people engage with them. So not just their number of followers, because a lot of people have high followers, but they're not necessarily really being engaged with very much. So you then measure engagement. At that stage, you're then going to need to make a decision as to whether you want this to be a commercial or an earned kind of relationship. Now, I'm a big fan of trying to go for more earned relationships. I think you said earlier that if you can get this influencer to do it because they care about you, great, people are going to feel that. If this influencer is doing it because he's being paid and you're one of 30 other brands he's paying, consumers aren't dumb. They know that, and they're not going to take it quite so well. So at that stage, I think, especially if you are sensitive on how much you want to spend, it's about filtering out the ones who are only going to do this for an outrageous contract, and the ones that you can engage with and come up with some cool content together that involves your product, gets your message across, but it's good for them as well as you.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it's like even little tricks like creating a, like a slightly different exclusive version for the influencer so that they will really pick it up, instead of just sending like a really general product to them. There are a lot of tricks that you can really find out. And like he said, when they meant it, it's a lot better than when you pay.
I think also influencer fit, that's a conversation we could have. For instance, I can share, a friend of mine was the former head of PR for Tiffany & Company, the jewelry brand, and they invited the model actress Emily Ratajkowski. She's very uber sexy kind of image, and his PR team did that, had an in-store appearance, and the crowds were enormous. But you know who showed up? Like creepy old men. And it wasn't the kind of, they were with Tiffany's looking for women. That's not going to translate into sales. So
But it's the men that buy the diamonds.
I don't think it
Or
really,
the women.
not engagement. I don't think it was translating the engagement rating. So, even the biggest and the best brands make the same mistake. But yeah, I think it's just really analyzing who you're working with.
Hi, my name's Helen from WGSN. My question's around KOLs and influencers as well. And we all know that the consumer's getting smarter and they're getting much more savvy. What do you think is the evolution from KOLs and influencers when we get tired of these kinds of marketing techniques, if you like?
Wow. I think if I really knew the answer to that, I'd have a much nicer jacket, I suspect, and some newer shoes. Where is it going? So, well, it's not going away. Put it that way. It's going to get more tightly regulated, and it's going to get more commercialized. And with that, it will then probably consolidate. So it will just become more of an effective industry, and I think, sadly, suffer for it a little bit. Ultimately, it will end up in the hands of WPP or Fox or something like that, right? That's the way it will go. At the moment, it's enormously entrepreneurial, except for the very few massive ones at the top. But it is an incredibly powerful form of, as yet, unaggregated media that smart people are going to start capitalizing on and controlling, sadly. That's kind of my view.
I've read several articles about how in the West, more so, that people are having KOL fatigue. It just doesn't mean anything to them anymore, seeing all these beautiful images of other people leaving these fake lives that they can't, are not realistic. One thing that I do think in terms of the direction of maybe marketing or branding is content creation. More and more people are taking that into their own hands. Content creation, because what you're sharing is information that you're knowledgeable about, and other people, you're essentially acting as educating other people. And when you do that consistently, your content, I mean, of course you have to build it to a point where you have people reading your content, but that content creation can be in a written form, in a video form, in a visual form. It's so much easier to do nowadays where everyone is very savvy with the camera.
I 100% agree. I think brands today are actually turning into media outlets themselves, and I see this as a trend. With the success of Net-a-Porter, Mr. Porter having their own really powerful content creation team. We literally have a massive editorial team as big as like marketing plus PR. And there's so much budget put into that. And I think for the brand to have a voice itself, it's really important. So that's why, because also for Totem Collective, I also started Totem Journal, which we write our own article. When you have a really successful article, even if it's just like cool pictures of a really new Instagrammable spot, it drives so much traffic to your website. It drives so much people to look at your products and eventually land deals.
But so I totally agree. But I think the two go hand in hand, right? So content marketing is without a doubt the future. Wherever you are, we're all becoming publishers. But ultimately, you're pushing things out primarily through social media. Yeah, a bit through search, but mainly you're talking about social media. The world we live in increasingly, we're shutting down in these little bubbles, but we're really listening to those around us. We're ignoring people with different opinions from outside. We're blocking out the people we want to block. We're increasingly using ad blockers. We're listening to the people that are within that social circle. So even if you're making amazing content, you do still need a distribution channel. It's still a media, right? So traditional media is important. Influencers are just another media now. So even with great content marketing, I think there's a future for the influencer because they're an amplifier of that content. A co-creator sometimes, like you said, but I think an amplifier.
Yeah, no, I agree. So that's why sometimes when we're creating the content, we think about how this is going to work. Like when we interview a celebrity, how a Hollywood reporter would basically take our article and write into something else, and then eventually reflect back to us. So when you're creating content yourself, you need to think about how this would work as a press release as well. Like how you can just share this article and it would be news relevant, and other journalists would share the same things.
Just two examples that I can think of. Obviously, these are big brands, but kind of taking a page out of their book. North Face, which is the also outdoors brand, they, in conjunction with an energy bar, they made a documentary about climbing in Yosemite. It's very specific, but if you think of the people who will be watching this documentary, that is exactly who they want to sell their product to. Norton Antivirus, a very unsexy brand who cares about software on your computer that you never pay any attention to. They made a documentary about the most dangerous town on the internet, and they found out, yeah, it's in Romania. It ended up going on to win awards for the documentary, but it's a very subtle message. It's not saying, hey, buy my antivirus software because you care, but it's like, this is how important cybersecurity is a very important issue. It affects everyone, and so then the consumers themselves will then make that connection and think, what can I do to protect myself?
Anyone else?
Hey, I just had a question around, say, repositioning of your brand. You spoke about how it's important that, there's a purpose or that it's a target audience. If you feel like you've perhaps gone down the wrong path and you want to sort of rebrand, any sort of tips or things to avoid?
Look, I think almost all brands evolve. If you look back at even the largest brands, you look back at your Coca-Colas and things like that, and you go back through their archive, they all evolve. Everybody changes. I think if you are completely rebranding and changing direction, that's one thing. If you're evolving, that's another. And I think ultimately it's okay to change a couple of times, but if you're constantly doing it, it means you probably haven't pinned down what your audience cares about and what you care about. So I think you've got to be sure that you've got that. So if you are having questions about going down a different route and you think it's because of the brand, you need to think about, is it because we stand for the wrong thing, is selling to the wrong people, or whether I just don't quite like the color of my logo. Those are very kind of different things from a branding point of view. So I think you need to think about the scale of the problem. A redesign and a reskin of your website and a rechange of your logo, that's fine. Targeting a different demographic with a different message, that can be quite a big shift to try and do, and you just need to be sure before you do it, because that can be hard to reverse, right?
And going back to your question, I think today if you want to do something really different, if you look at big brands like Gucci or Balenciaga, who have quite successfully rebranded their entire brand and their entire universe. And I think doing something that is so off, that is so unexpected from what you were doing before, at least, sometimes it works really well. When you just completely flip, like instead of doing slow transitions, I personally find doing a massive change that is like, wow, like I never thought this brand would do such a thing or shoot these images or work with this photographer. Then it's like, then I think if you can really sustain that momentum with the new energy, then that's a successful rebranding.
Are you thinking of it because it's also different if it's a sales issue versus a customer feedback issue, a self-alignment issue, you're bored of your logo. Okay, so we found what the problem is, so that's fine. That one's easy to do. But I think do customer research before you do it, because while it is your brand and it's important to you, actually the idea is to make it relevant to the audience. So don't just change it personally for you. Try and find out what the customer really wants and try and at least feed that into your thinking.
Do you know who I like recently, their work in advertising is KFC. So last year in Hong Kong, I don't know if you remember, it's fried chicken. And then they seeded a bunch of products, nail polish, to food bloggers, and that said it was red and orange, and they said it was finger licking good, which is their slogan for many, many years. So apparently if you licked the nail polish, it would taste like chicken. And then recently this year, they have KFC,
suntan
Colonel
cream.
Sanders,
We did
cell
suntan
phones.
cream.
Yeah. Well, cell phones, but also clothing, jewelry, like you have Colonel Sanders, like a necklace, like very strange, like a weird brand extension, but it works. I mean, can you guys dissect that a little bit? Like, why?
So I think some brands are really interesting. So I think KFC, there's only so much food porn with really fatty chicken that you can put out there when everybody's really quite health conscious. So you want to do a different route. And I think lots of brands are extremely successful about creating an image and an emotional reaction to what they stand for that is a long way off what they do. Red Bull is a fantastic example. Never once have you seen the, I'm sure quite delicious product in the advertising. Never once. You never hear the fact that it's packed full of sugar and is really quite bad for you and is mostly drunk by people underage with vodka. Right? I mean, every other alcohol brand would have been trashed for this, but they don't get any of it because they've branded themselves as a lifestyle experience company that does wacky things on motorbikes. It's genius. But, it's completely miles away from the product. And I think not many people can do that, but I think it's an interesting way to go to get a bit of attention. Does that really build brand affinity for KFC? No, but what it does give you is that company has a sense of humor and they're a little bit fun, they don't take themselves too seriously, and while everyone else is zigging, they'll zag. So they can't carry it on forever. There's only so many products we can make, but I think it's quite cool.
What I find funny about that is we requested, and I know a lot of my other journalist friends requested the nail polish, and they're like, yeah, sure, we're going to roll it out. It was just testing with KOLs, and then the public's going to vote on what they like, and then it'll be mass distribution for sale. It never happened. And so I really do feel like, I think it was Ogilvy, could be wrong, so double check it, but
That's
I think
right.
Ogilvy, I think they got away with so much. Like, they never produced the nail polish. It's just kind of a marketing stunt, and yet it got so much pickup. It was one of our best performing stories. I'm sure for many publications it was too. So at the end of the day, was it all this fuss for nothing? I think you could probably argue that, but
it's great. So they don't want to spend lots of money on advertising. It's a great way to earn attention. They've been doing it for years. So they did a thing with them in the US where they made the kernel from space, and they got so much chicken that they put in a field in the shape of the kernel that you could supposedly see it from space. All it cost them was the price of the chicken, and it got global coverage. So it's a really effective way of getting attention. Is it an effective way of building a brand? Again, I don't know.
Building the brand, but is that really going to translate into the product sales? That's questionable. But one other brand that comes to mind is WeWork. So they went from calling themselves a technology company to a real estate company to now they're calling themselves hospitality company. So as your company evolves and grows, you can definitely give it a different narrative, and that if that narrative is about yourself, you can, it's okay to change the story because your brand is evolving.
I mean, I think doing things in a really random way is a really good way to get good, PR. But yes, we've also
Kind
done.
of confusing, Bohan.
I mean, personally, I think I personally like to have a lot of random ideas for the brand that I want to do. You know, just like take over a street, like do random party in the middle of nowhere, and just like take random pictures of it. And I think things like that, or even Vêtements, you know, they just like did a car park exhibition, and it was cool. And I think it's good to innovate and not take yourselves too seriously. And I think in that sense, you can build kind of a, you know, people just think you're the cool guys who do these cool things, and then eventually they would feel like they're part of your thing. And that is a good way. I mean, obviously depends on what kind of products you're selling, but.
I think we have time for one more question.
Like in today's world of marketing fantasies, so is that somewhere the product quality has compromised in consumers' mind?
No. I think it's harder to get away with shoddy products now, much harder. I think, you know, in the bad old days, if you were sold, I don't know, white goods or something that were faulty and you couldn't get the warranty back on it, there were a few consumer protection programs on TV you could call up and complain to. You complain to maybe a government watchdog. You could try and get it into a consumer magazine that would list dodgy products, but not many. But now I can go out and make a massive noise on Facebook and go and do a stand protest on their LinkedIn page and call up their press office and really affect change. So I think, I think consumer power is way, way, way stronger to police products these days, which is fabulous news. Whether that's led to higher product quality or just more complaining, I don't know, but I think it's harder to sell rubbish.
So I think it's really important for new brands nowadays to think about, actually you need to have most people don't really think about that. You need to have a good return policy, or like if something breaks or if it's this faulty product, how do you fix that and how do you react really quickly? And that is something really important to have the customer to keep as a loyal customer.
I actually think I think you're judged by the experience of shopping, buying a product, receiving a product. You're judged on all of it now, much more than you were, and I think your brand ultimately will completely die now. You used to be able to sustain a reasonably decent brand and iffy customer service, iffy experience. I think it's now the opposite. I think you have to start with having a brilliant experience and then market it. Otherwise it will fall apart. I mean, there's an insurer that I won't mention that's got 3 letters that's done a brilliant job of marketing itself in this market, going really interesting creative content and really interesting way of packaging up their products and stuff as well. But ultimately, when you get past the shop window, they've just bought an old insurer and rebranded it. That is no change for my customer experience. I'm getting exactly the kind of service and sentiment from dealing with them as you would have done from the previous company. So that's, I think, a massive failure of changing the business. Failure to change the business when you change the brand.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you everyone on stage for teaching us how to stand out and elevate our brands. And on behalf of the HKTDC, I would like to once again thank our speakers and moderator. And we have more seminars for buyers and exhibitors to get latest market intelligence and prepare for future business opportunities. 11:45 a.m. tomorrow at the same venue, representatives from Style Mason, Malunaka, Uchita, and Zum Zum, Muto, and Dress Undress will bring us the hearts and hands behind the masters, Japanese craftsmanship from traditions to modern. The session will be conducted in English and Japanese with consecutive interpretation in English. And to show our courtesies to our speaker and also our appreciation to you all, we have prepared some souvenirs for you. You are welcome to take some at the back of our counter. And we hope to see you again. And meanwhile, please enjoy your stage at our center stage 217. We wish you fruitful business at the fair. Thank you very much.